Would someone like to read number, oh, let me get down to number 3.
I would do that.
Thank you.
Question 3. By what doth he redeem? Answer: by his blood, by his life, by his power, by his nature sown in the vessel and transforming the vessel into its own likeness. Yea, this is indeed redemption, when the creature is changed into and brought forth in the image, power, nature, virtue, and divine life of him that redeemeth, and the old contrary image perfectly blotted out by the presence and indwelling of the new. This is perfect redemption, the least measure whereof is redemption in a degree. I'm going to stop there because that's full of material.
Yes, thank you. This question and answer are reminding me of a verse in 1 John chapter 3, which is, beloved, for now we are the sons of God, and we know not what we shall be. But when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And that verse contrasts or shows the movement from one state of being to another, from the state where the Son of God has not appeared to the state where he has appeared. And the scripture verse says, and we are like him, for we see him as he is. And I think that that verse nicely captures the conflation of both being and seeing the Redeemer, of both incorporating or embodying that spirit and yet seeing it as distinct from us. So that conflation, I can't think of another word for it, of our core being with the Spirit of Christ is stated in that verse as well as in this answer by Penington. That we're changed and brought forth in the image and divine life of him that redeemeth. So it shows a change for the better at the core of our being changed into the Spirit of Christ, that we're both unified with and distinct from inwardly.
That verse in 1 John also mirrors or echoes the last two lines of chapter 3 of 2 Corinthians, where we all, with unveiled face, beholding or reflecting the glory of the Lord, are being changed into his likeness. From one degree of glory to another. This, I've spent a lot of time looking at that chain of images, and I'm kind of baffled. What does it mean? Where do we look at him? And how do we look at him that we get transformed into his nature? But and yet I think very slowly it's happening to us. And we're likely to say, what, me? But if he looks at us and nods and says, yes, you, we better believe it.
This afternoon, I just happened upon some kind of panel discussion that was being moderated by David Brooks, who is a New York Times columnist. And each of the people in the discussion were scholars or writers or a politician. And every one of them pointed out the need for a spiritual revolution in society as an answer to the melees that we're undergoing and the threats that we're confronted with. And I couldn't help but see that the situation or the hope that they had was pointing to the inward spiritual understanding that the early friends had, that it was that living faith that they were calling for. And it seems like an extraordinary time in the world's progress that we're up against a wall, that we either find this faith that is authentic or we descend into something that's savage. And I think that in the Second World War, that was even more pronounced, but somehow there was enough of the Christian institutions still functioning at that time to allow a recovery of sorts, even though it wasn't the authentic faith that is experienced within. At least it was upholding the Christian understanding, even if all the people doing it were pretty much putting up a facade rather than having something genuine behind it. But now that generation is long gone, and the boomer generation wanted an authenticity and recognized that it wasn't there, and so they rejected that Christianity for the most part. And the generations that have come after have even lost the basic externals of that tradition. But now it's happening in elite panel discussions of how this authentic faith is necessary. So I think it's an extraordinary time, and it's a little frustrating to know that this authentic faith is set out for us in the early Friends' writings and in scripture, and it's just not being recognized largely in the society.
So perhaps it's time to move on to the second paragraph, unless there's another comment.
I'm looking at the last sentence in the paragraph. This topic of redemption, like so many of the topics that Isaac Penington has been focusing us on, I'm having to reboot my mind. I find that I've carried so many implicit biases, if that's the term, with regard to some of these terms, and I need to square them, correct them with early Friends' understanding. I mean, the way I have been brought up to understand redemption is that it's sort of a black and white thing. It's on or off. You're redeemed or you're not redeemed. So I'm appreciating thinking of this last sense, contrast, speaking of, this is perfect redemption. The least measure whereof is redemption in a degree. So just the understanding the notion that redemption can be on a spectrum, can be a matter of degree, is new to me. But if I, look at the earlier question and answers and consider the way Isaac is defining redemption, it makes sense. So anyway, I really appreciate just what that last sentence is lifting for me.
I'm grateful to you, Tom, for saying that, because it is redemption. This is a conundrum for me. Redemption in a degree. What is that? And it reminds me that I once heard in worship, and I'm guessing that it was about 20 years ago, the words, "I will not let you fall into sin." Oh, I remember. It was when I had fallen in love with my wife, Elizabeth. And I was so worried about being carried away by my emotions and doing something that was not God's will. And this was the reassurance I got, loud and clear. What? He will not let me fall into sin? I couldn't believe it. But looking back, I guess I've lost my temper a few times, but not seriously hurt anybody, and driven over the speed limit, not a few times, but no, I haven't, betrayed a trust, not a major trust. I've forgotten promises, but I feel that that was a true prophecy that I got. Don't worry. And my shepherd has got me on a leash, is the only way I can put it. I don't feel like I'm kinder, wiser, better, godlier, but I do feel like I'm on a leash that I can't see or feel. And that feels like this may be the redemption in a degree that Isaac Penington is talking about. I'm definitely in the sheepfold and not wandering around outside. And in that is safety.
This concept of being changed reminded me of an earlier part of this essay about concerning regeneration. I went back and looked at it a bit because it occurred to me, so if we're being changed, it seems that both regeneration and redemption have a part to play. So when I went back and read it, regeneration or rebirthing, in Penington's explanation, is the first springing up of the new life in us, which shows us our darkness and where we really are. And it sort of invites us into this process of being changed. And we have to yield our way into that. And then the redemption seems to be the process of sort of, in a sense, fulfilling that potential change and growing into it from the first rebirth. And I like this thing, he does it by his blood, which I understand is a cleansing blood, by the infusion of his life, his power and energy and ability enabling us, and of course by Christ's nature sown in the vessel, transforming it into its own likeness. And yeah, I do understand it doesn't all happen at once. My own experience is that it does require a continual yielding.
I think Pat was sharing earlier about different generations and how they're generations of humans and how whether we're getting it or not, or that's what I heard. And then I was parking on that when Zion in any heart is built up, it's natural to the Lord to appear there in glory. And the pure eye sees it and goes on, the pure heart is one with it. And for some reason, I kept getting the scripture, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell cannot prevail against it. So I don't need to mourn that the church is going away and that there will not be generations. That is happening. I have faith in that. And what is that? Well, it isn't Peter the person. It's the revelation of the Father. And I was thinking, well, the heart building up, that doesn't happen in an instant. It is a process. And is my eye pure? And is my heart pure? No, but there are moments of cleansing and clarity where there's clear understanding of the Father and like an imbuing of life with his life. So anyway, I find hope in that. And it may seem to, it's not making logical sense, but it's making spiritual sense to me. It's really a beautiful message. After her long desolation and sore widowhood, which he will give unto her in the sight of all the world, whereby she shall become the beauty, joy, praise of the whole earth, and so on.
Would you go ahead and read that whole paragraph? We had not done that yet, but it does.
Oh,
feel-
I'm sorry. I didn't know. I thought you read the whole thing.
I
So
sort of-
starting where?
And after this springs up the glory of the life.
Okay, yeah, it was hard to focus on all of it. So I'm forgive me for coming in late.
No worries.
Okay. And after this springs up the glory of the life in the vessel, even the glory which it had had with the Father before the world was. In the nature of the life, the glory is hid. It is sown in the seed. It dies with the seed. It is raised with the seed. When Zion in any heart is built up, it is natural to the Lord to appear there in his glory. And the pure eyes see it, and the pure heart enjoys and is one with it. So that there is a true entrance into, fellowship in, and enjoyment of the death of Christ. So is there also of the resurrection and glory of the redeemed life, which is the portion and inheritance which God hath prepared for Zion, after her long desolation and sore widowhood, which he will give unto her in sight of all the world, whereby she shall become the beauty, joy, and praise of the whole earth, who hath hitherto been the reproached, despised, and afflicted, and made a prey of by the several sorts of devouring spirits.
Thank you.
Autumn, would it be possible for you to recount what you had said earlier regarding this paragraph now that we've had a chance to hear it? If you could do that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I was taking in what Dee had shared about the different generations, and I was trying to read through because I felt I'm late. Let me see how this is hitting me. I thought you'd read it all. And I kept getting the passage about the dialogue between Jesus and Peter, where Jesus says, well, you know, the Father revealed this to you, who Jesus was. And he says, upon this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell cannot prevail against it. And I was also thinking about redemption as a process. And then a couple of the parts of this came out to me. And one was, when in Zion any heart is built up, it's natural to the Lord to appear there in his glory. And I was thinking that revelation, that first passage that came to me from outside this, you know, Peter received a revelation from the Father of who Jesus was, and we receive a revelation of who the Father and Jesus is and who we are. And that's part of the heart being built up, but that is not, I get pieces in larger form, but I don't get that in an instant. It's almost like the lapping of the waves of the ocean. I get successive revelation that then builds up my heart. And that's where God is. And then I was thinking, focusing on the part of, you know, purity, pure heart, pure eyes. You know, I never pass that test, usually. I mean, in a moment, maybe I don't pass, but as things get cleansed and as revelation comes, there's more clarity and pureness, to see and experience the living presence of the life in it, with the eyes in the heart, with the inward eyes and in the inner man. And then I was thinking of the beauty of the last part of it, you know, all the God hath prepared for Zion after her long desolation and sore widowhood, and just what he's prepared for us. So there's a process in everything, in the church being built up, in the inner life being revealed and built up in us. That's my kindergarten view. With also the revelation of this great hope, the church is not going to fail to be built up. And which means even if we see in mankind disappearing ability to have revelation or the life or knowledge of this, I don't believe it's going away. I truly know that he is working in humankind. And the gates of hell won't stop it. Is it Isaiah where it's rejoice, O barren one, It's all about. Yeah, I'll have to look that up.
First time I read through this, I was surprised by the sentence, so that as there is a true entrance into, fellowship in, and enjoyment of the death of Christ. And I thought, what a strange thing to say there's an enjoyment of the death of Christ. But in fact, as this is experienced and known, as the process is known, that one has to die to the self in order for this life to come in that is so much better, one enjoys and wants and looks forward to that dying to the self, knowing what will follow, knowing that it's necessary in order to receive that greater life. So what first seemed surprising, upon further reflection, made sense and was found to be true. Another thing that I found surprising about it was the very ending, where it speaks in such glowing terms. She shall become the beauty, joy, and praise of the whole earth, who hath hitherto been reproached, despised, and afflicted, and made a prey of by the several sorts of devouring spirits. It seemed surprising to me to end it on such what seemed like a sour note, referring to the devouring spirits. But again, I think that knowing this life and the beauty and the joy of it, that the devouring spirits can be accepted and faced without cowering, without fear. Somehow one becomes immune to the normal destruction that we see in the first birth and are afraid of. There's a confidence in the life, the regenerated life, the redeemed life. And we know its strength and beauty.
I find that very helpful when he speaks of that, Pat, because the confidence for me is the revelation of the church, but the personal confidence he speaks of is the overcoming that I'm in transition on and not there yet. It's easy to get. It has been easy to be discouraged, and yet I thy truth when he speaks it.
Well, even knowing it and being convinced of it, one can still easily slip back into that other first birth understanding and be plagued by all the by all the threats that I don't know why we're so accustomed to. We've lived much of our lives in that. Is it habitual, or it's a strange bifurcation of the understanding that we know that this Christ's spirit is strong and sustaining and available, and yet we can lose sight of it and become just as weak as we were formerly. Not quite. I mean, we still remember it's there, whereas before we knew it, we had no idea it was there. So we can hold on to it intellectually, but I think what Penington ends in this postscript, I read through that too, and we'll get into it, but there's a difference between being able to hold on to something intellectually and to know it, and between that and having one's being elevated and sustained by it. And to be fearless and confident requires the latter of being sustained and infiltrated by it, to have it part of our being rather than just to know that, yes, it's there. To move from one to the other is the goal. But I'm certainly grateful that I know it's there, even if I'm not always enlivened by it.
There's an element in this wisdom from Patricia and Autumn, which reminds me of a warning, in a sense, that when one is faced with afflictions and insults, that if they're not transformed within us, they'll be transmitted. And Christ showed us that it was possible and gradually enables in us to bear the iniquities of the devouring spirits and transform them into something beautiful. I think all of us probably find that at times. And at times we don't hold on to that closely enough and can either inwardly or outwardly respond or react. But the promise in this paragraph is quite wonderful.
I'm trying to understand about Zion. So I think the first reference in this paragraph is perhaps the kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven. And the second reference, it feels more like this kingdom of heaven in a corporate sense or maybe an individual sense? Or is he speaking of all those who have received this redemption, all of the friends who were under such terrible devouring spirits? Is he talking about us individually, that we will be beauty, joy, and praise of the whole earth? I'm wondering how people interpret that.
I don't think I understand everything that Zion might mean, but for me, when I read that word, it sounds like the New Jerusalem that is built up in the heart with the crystal clear waters flowing between the streams of life, and the Lamb is on the throne.
Well, they were carried away captive, and the captors wanted them to sing songs of Zion. And to me, that's a place of spiritual home in the Father or in God. So it's a spiritual place for me rather than a physical one. A place prepared for our home being in and with, imbued with the life of God.
In the prophecy of Micah, there is a promise that all nations will flow uphill to the Mount Zion. It's really quite arresting. I think it's right at the beginning of chapter 4, after a kind of gloomy prelude. But in the latter days, it's as if gravity is reversed and people of all kinds stream upward towards the holy mountain. And I think that's in a lot of the thought of the Hebrew prophets, that something wonderful is coming that kind of defies the laws of nature as we know them. There's a momentum upward that we just don't see in nature.
Along those same lines, I think that what we don't see in nature is a close understanding of our unity with one another, because in nature, we are separate individuals. And I think, Madeline, you were talking about whether this was a reference to individuals or to the corporate. That's what I'm remembering, or at least there was some kind of question about that in what you had said. And in line with the reorientation or understanding of being, how that changes through this coming of the Lord into our hearts and souls. we in that state are no longer seeing our sense of being as being centered in this individual self. The sense of being becomes more of a corporate thing of unity with others who have the same experience of Christ within. So I think that there's a shift from the individual to the corporate that is genuine and healthy. I think that humanity tries to approximate that shift on its own terms. And when humanity tries to effect this, it becomes very corrupt, and it makes it impossible for God to reach the individual soul, because there is a conformity that denies the individual's capacity to respond to Christ. But when it happens through God's work, then it's healthy, then it's genuine. But like all else in man-made religion, when man tries to effect what God only can do, then there comes a great sin and destruction. And that's called conformity.
Well, we've reached the 1 hour mark. Is there anything else that anyone would like to add? And then once I stop the recording, we'll talk about our next meeting.
I'm remembering some other writing of Penington's where he's pleading with the reader not to be content with the painted likeness of the spiritual experience, saying that he for a long time was content with a painted likeness, and it was not the real thing. And what you just said, Pat, reminded me of that.